So this statement 13 has a very long commentary, in part because Choda feels that he has to respond to the counterpoints that Sakya Pandita, and then from Sakya Pandita, of course, also others, particularly from the Sakya lineage, have written in kind of the generations of kind of debate that has ensued, right, on this matter. So the commentary itself, I think it's a little hard, I think, for us. So instead, I think, instead of going through the commentary first, I think we look at the notes first. Then if we go through the notes, and if you want to, you can go back to the commentary and look at the details of the commentary. So I think we should now look at the notes because the Professor Sobish has consistently, have given very helpful notes for us to get the broader implications of many of these statements. So the notes for statement 13, according to the Dorshima, the general view to be refuted is that the foundations of the rules is neutral. Now, if the foundation or root of the rules is in general neutral, the Buddha can grant exceptions, since non-virtue arises only through the breaking of the rule, not due to the act itself. Yeah, so that's like a very strong prevailing view, that the foundation is neutral, and so therefore the Buddha can grant exceptions. So continuing from this way of thought, Arya Shariputra, for instance, taught the Dharma until after sundown to the lady Dampa Peldenma. But the Buddha granted an exception, and thus there was no harm. So thus it is said Shariputra did not break a rule. And most people explain it because the Buddha granted an exception. But when a woman was drowning, the Buddha permitted the monks to touch her, saying, "Produce the notion that the woman is a clot of earth taken away by the river. Grasp her by her hair and braids and pull her out." Unquote. Therefore, what he first prohibited the monks to do, namely to stay alone with women after sundown and to touch women, on one occasion, he later permitted. So some would explain it. See, in those circumstances, the Buddha allowed, in those circumstances, the Buddha permitted. So the prevailing view is that, somehow the Buddha was so amazing and powerful. So then whatever he permitted and whatever he prohibited is based on the situation. And therefore, that is why. Here, what Jigten Sumgön wants to say is that is not why. Yeah, so even if in conclusion, you do this or you don't do that, right? He wants us to understand that we should not say that in conclusion, we do this and we don't do that because the Buddha allowed it here and disallowed it there. He says that is wrong view. It's not based on that principle. So Jigten Sumgön rejects this general view, stating that whatever the Buddha has prohibited and permitted was in fact inveterately prohibited and inveterately permitted. The Rinjangma ties this terminology to Pamodrupa, providing the following quotation. When the mind associates with afflictions, with kleshas, the act that follows it is non-virtuous. And temporarily and ultimately, the result arises as suffering. If this is the case, when the prohibition is inveterately prohibited, and then the prohibition is inveterately prohibited. Inveterately means, in all cases. When the mind does not associate with afflictions, the act that follows is not non-virtuous, and temporarily and ultimately the result arises as happiness. If this is the case, then the permission is inveterately permitted. Yeah, so in both ways of looking at it, the opposing way and this way, you can say, you could say, either way of looking at it, if we really follow the Buddha, then you still won't do what the Buddha says not to do, and you will still do what the Buddha says to do. But for Jigten Sumgun, the reason is very important. He says the reason here is, so in the case of Shariputra teaching the lady until throughout the night, on the surface looks like, the vow has been broken. But in fact, the vow that says a monk should not spend a night with an unrelated woman who is not a mother, who is not a sister, who's not a daughter. A monk should not spend a night alone. Or a monk should not, touch a woman. It says that in that case, yes, but the reason is not because the Buddha allowed one and disallowed the other. The reason is in those two cases, the afflictive emotions are not involved. And that's why it's quote unquote allowed. Not because the Buddha made some special, permission, gave special permission. And this ties us back to the first statement of the Gongchik of chapter 1. So the first statement of Gongchik chapter 1, if you recall, well, let's go back. Particularly not the statement, but even more is the general view. It says, in general, people claim that since the Buddha is the Lord of Dharma, he teaches things as he holds them, and thus they are like that. In the book, physical book, page 49. Which is to say, the prevailing view is that because the Buddha is the Lord of the Dharma, then, in other words, as Lord, meaning as king, the king gets to make his rules as he wishes. I've said when we discussed that I think majority of us don't necessarily think of the Buddha like that. But emotionally, I think we still relate to Buddha like that, as if Buddha is God with a capital G. Even intellectually, we say, I don't believe in capital G God, right? But still, our actions show that somewhere hidden back there, we want Daddy to keep us safe, take all the problems away from us. Then we expect, a daddy-like principle to kind of sweep in and rescue us in the last moment. That all those kinds of attitudes are still kind of hidden, Because in some way, right, that the attitude of, what I call theism, right, there is some biological basis for that. Yeah? A belief in someone else, yeah, taking care of my problems. It's biologically ingrained, because it is true. First of all, if your biological mother did not keep you in her womb for those 9 months, keep you healthy, you won't be here. Then after she birthed you, if she or somebody else, at least for the first year, right, before you can crawl to try to look for food, if that first year you didn't have somebody take care of you, you will be dead. Yeah, so you're born in the world, immediately when you open your eyes. First, I think they say the baby doesn't really see anything clearly yet, but over time, as the faculties become sharper, then it begin, but vaguely even, right? You have a vague sense of like there's someone, something out there. And every time you feel like something wrong, which later you learn is hunger, right? When you feel something wrong, at that point, no concept yet. All you know to do is wah, 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 and then that feeling of something wrong disappears. Few hours later, you feel uncomfortable because what goes in has to come out. Then wah, 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 and then miraculously, oh, that uncomfortable feeling down there is gone. You're clean. So biologically, there's a basis for believing that someone else is going to solve my problems. Because, so it's so ingrained. I do not think, either that the Buddha is saying that only you can solve your problem. Buddha talked about interdependence. So theism is a form of exaggeration. Then individualism is another form of exaggeration. I'll do it by myself, by myself, by myself. So the meme response that I posted, Fabiola posted, a funny thing about, some Buddhists say, there are no gods. My religion, there are no gods, no spirits. And then some others, Avalokiteshvara with 1,000 arms, And then which is true, many who are Buddhists, especially in the West, is the first one, no spirits, no. And the issue there is not so much that they don't, for me, the issue there is not even so much that they don't believe in spirits or gods or whatever. It's fine. It's the second part to that is often hidden, which is they are so proud that, like, oh, spirits, gods, hell realms, God realms, this is all just not real. What is not seen there is, but they strongly hold to, but my experience is real. And I am real. That's the bigger issue there. It's not the issue of whether, these other creatures exist or not. The other extreme is all these things exist. I exist. All these things are real. I am real. In the Mahayana, with 5 bazillion Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Mahayana Sutras, I say, Mahayana Sutras sometimes feel like Atlanta Airport, the busiest airport in the United States. Planes are landing, planes are taking off, deities are arriving, deities are taking off, It's amazing, in the Mahayana Sutras, there's never any, air collision, with the comings and goings of so many deities, so many Buddhas. But you miss that point if you are stuck in, these deities existing, The Mahayana Sutras are showing also, to the degree you think you're real, then how can you be so sure all those things are not real? And to the degree that you think they are not real, you also need to turn it around and ask, am I real? Well, you are as real as what you think out there is real. You are as not real as you think what is out there is not real. Yeah. Anyway, so theism, God, Buddha is going to decide and solve my problems, or I'm going to decide and solve my problems. Both are exaggerated, mistaken views, interdependence. So anyway, coming back to here. Yeah? So this quote from Pamodrupa very clearly shows, like what it means to inveterately prohibit or inveterately permit is based on, are the kleshas involved or not? If the kleshas are involved, then no occasion would the Buddha say, oh, that's allowed, that's permitted. The Dorshema cites an almost identical quote from Jigten Sumgön's text, this Punzan Dela Damba. Such an instruction is no longer available. Okay, well. This particular text, In another word, Jigten Sumgön discusses that which is inveterately prohibited and provides the gloss natural non-virtue. So there's this expression, natural non-virtue. The commentaries point out again that it is within the powers of the Buddha to recognize what is virtuous and non-virtuous by its fundamental nature. So it is within the powers of the Buddha to recognize. But it is not within the power of Buddhas, and therefore, for that matter, it's not within the power of anyone to make up the rule. Oh, this is virtuous, this is non-virtuous. Yeah. But it is within the powers of Buddhas to recognize what is non-virtuous and what is virtuous by its fundamental nature. He possesses the 10 powers of the Tathagata, of which one is the knowledge, the gnosis that perceives what is and what is not appropriate. Thus, the Buddha is an expert in instructing beings, since, as it is expressed in the Rinjangma, quote, having connected to the mind of an individual who is the basis, the Tathagata teaches a training suited to him. So one of the powers of Buddhas is that they can, as we say in English, they can be in your shoes. So we have the expression, like you're not in their shoes, meaning you don't know them and their situation, their suffering, their confusion. Or walk a mile in their shoes, and then you'll understand. One of the qualities, one of the abilities of Buddhas is that they can do that. And because they can directly perceive the suffering of a particular being, the confusion of a particular being, therefore they can teach them accordingly. So although superficially when you look, you think, oh, Buddha is giving special permission to this person. That is not the case. The Buddha never, Buddhas never would work against the principles of karma. In general, Buddhist texts often point out that the Buddha and his disciple Shariputra were experts in knowing exactly what would be required to guide a being onto the path. Shariputra was even able to put animals on the path. Karmachakne tells the story in some detail. At the time of Buddha Kashyapa, there was an old arhat with an ugly voice who was chanting with a youth who had a beautiful voice. The boy said to his teacher, "Your chanting is like the barking of a dog." Consequently, the disciple was reborn as a dog 500 times. When eventually he was reborn in Shravasti, a merchant's son attacked him and broke his leg, the dog. Shariputra found the crippled dog and gave it some food so that the dog grew attached to him. The dog was finally reborn as a Brahmin's son, found Shariputra, took ordination from him, and became an arhat. We looked at this example last time. Another of the Buddha's powers is that he possesses the knowledge of the virtuous and non-virtuous. This power is a combination of his knowledge of the fundamental nature and his understanding of the minds of beings. Therefore, for instance, he understands that hoarding and desirously eating food is non-virtuous. And he explains that one should eat food just as one receives it. That is, without evaluating such things as its quality and tastiness. And that one should not keep it for a later time. Hence, the rule that prohibits taking meals afternoon. So there was a reason, why the Buddha said, don't take meals afternoon. So that's all part of hoarding. Some people hold that the Buddha can make exceptions to this rule, allowing, for instance, the sick to take meals afternoon, right? So when someone, a sick monk, the Buddha said, oh, then you can take afternoon, right? So then people misunderstand this and say, oh, actually, there's no problem eating anytime you want. And the reason why the Buddha gave monks the rule, don't eat afternoon, is just to make them tougher. All right? You might think, oh, it's just to make them tougher. But me, I don't need to be tough. This is just for the monks. Gilbert Rinpoche says, that's wrong view. The reason why monks who are sick can eat, monks who are not sick should not eat, is not because that the rule was established arbitrarily, but by nature they were established. But Jiten Sumgan points out that since the basis for the rule is not neutral, a meal desirously eaten afternoon is always non-virtuous, whether a person is sick or not. So that means even when the Buddha says, oh, if you are sick as a monk, you can eat afternoon, but you eat, ooh, yum, yum, like most of us, how we eat, then of course, then of course, you're hooked. Sick or not, allowed or not. On the other hand, when someone eats a meal with the intention of becoming well and strong again in order to benefit others, such a meal is always virtuous. The commentators illustrate this view through two examples. So then, I think for us, clearly, right? Some more than others. I'm the first to confess, eating is like, tasty. So we know that's how we operate. Then at least if we're able to think also, oh, and also, this will allow me to be in a better physical shape and therefore better mental shape to be good to others. Then at least, some virtue is also created, even as the non-virtue of attachment and judgment. Oh, yum, 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 yum. At least some virtue is also created. And they will ripen accordingly. Virtue ripen, right? So I talked about this was actually in Kagyu Sangha on Wednesday night. I said that we should look closely at when we say bad karma, good karma, negative karma, positive karma. Sometimes too imprecise, and the baggage that we have from our previous religious tradition or the baggage from like popular culture can mess up our understanding, our proper understanding of karma as taught by the Buddha. So when we look at karma, there are actually two words, karma, vipaka. Karma and vipaka. Karma is on the cause end of things. Vipaka is on the result end of things. So karma is action, intentional action. Vipaka is outcome of action. If you look at it from the end of action, karma, then instead of labeling it as good and bad, I think a more helpful label is skillful, not skillful. Skillful is when the act is done with a recognition of that which involves klesha brings suffering, that is free from klesha brings happiness. And when we act according to that understanding, then an action can be labeled skillful or unskillful. On the end of vipaka, of outcome, then desirable outcome or undesirable outcome. So we completely leave alone the very loaded labels of good and bad. Desirable outcome or undesirable outcome. In calling it desirable outcome and undesirable outcome, there's one other aspect that is involved, that is also necessary to recognize, which is what is desirable or undesirable is in the end contingent upon the way we label it. But this label is very powerful because this label is habitual. The labeling process is habitual. That's why we're stuck. That's why we're stuck. But nonetheless, it's based on our label. When you're a child, right? Bitter food, you always label as undesirable. Then when you're older, certain bitter foods, you now label, oh, desirable. When you're a child, like some of you, like beer, right? Oh, ugh, undesirable. then you're later, desirable. Spicy. It's the same chili, right? When I eat, I label as desirable. When some of you eat, you label as undesirable. Yeah. So when we understand, in a more precise way, that when we talk about karma, really we need to look at it. Are we talking about cause? Or are we talking about actions and the outcome of the actions? Or are we talking about which side? Yeah? So on the side of actions, always ask yourself, is this skillful or not skillful? On the end of experiencing the outcome of actions, recognize, oh, this I say desirable. Oh, that I say undesirable. Then that is also a reminder, in the end, your mind is this making these decisions. Of course, your mind right now has no freedom to make decisions because it's under the power of habit, karmic habits, karmic propensities. Yeah, questions or comments before we move on?
I had a question, Dr. Lai.
Uh-huh.
What is the alaya? Does that have to do?
No,
with
not here.
No? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Not here.
So,
Dr. Lai. Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Oh, that was me. It's okay. You go first.
Evelyn,
Yeah.
go.
Oh, okay. Well, what's interesting about labeling vipaka as desirable and undesirable is that you're using those words to denote the result, but I also use those words to what's desirable conditions for more good seeds to grow. So it's not so close as good and bad. You're describing the result, but it's also desirable for more good seeds.
No, that's the training that we should have. I'm just describing it as how we habitually experience things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the basis, the base level first, we need to understand. Yes. Yeah. The base level we need to understand first. What you say is, after you understand the base level, then you can also ask, actually, is this outcome desirable with enlightenment as a reference point? With enlightenment as reference point, often what we label as desirable is not desirable. That's second point, yes, the bigger point. But first, let's understand the base level understanding. Larry?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A few thoughts come to mind on this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I think it seems to me that these notes are also related to the idea that was expressed in an earlier lecture or discussion about how karma is either good or bad. There's no neutral.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of intent in an action comes into play because in many cases, depending on your intent, the karma can be good or bad. You can do the same action, but if the intent is different.
Yeah, skillful or unskillful, yes.
Skillful or unskillful, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting because the point about there being no neutral karma.
Mm-hmm.
Myself, I wasn't really sure how to, whether to take that as being the case or not. Most of the
Mm-hmm.
discussions I found, I tend to agree with the outcome. I tend to understand it. But in that case, I really wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole discussion is very much consistent with the idea that you generate bad karma and good karma with the same act, but it may be in different degrees.
Mm-hmm.
But the act itself is positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought that occurs to me is that, you know, these rules, it's so hard to conduct yourself perfectly. We really, for most of us, at least for myself, it's almost impossible to think that you can manage your life in such a way that you never do harmful act, that you never incur negative karma.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find in looking at my own behavior is that in many cases, good and bad karma is being generated by the same act, because sometimes your intention is mixed. You don't have pure intention.
Always.
But the more your intention is good, the more positive karma is generated, and the
Yes.
negative karma is minimized.
Yes.
The other thing about breaking all the rules, I think also the discussion is extremely consistent in that you are generating negative karma, but perhaps the ability to purify it is not so extreme.
Yes.
In other words, you're violating. It's like jaywalking.
Mm-hmm.
You're making a violation. You shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But the way to atone for it, the way to purify it,
Mm-hmm.
is also at hand, because the rules
Yes.
are so many. You can't avoid in your daily
Yes.
life having an intention that's not going to generate negative karma.
Yes.
Like if you kill an insect, it's
Yeah.
negative karma.
Yeah.
But your ability to discharge that violation with purification is also
Yes.
something which is readily at hand.
Absolutely. And that's why in other contexts I've reminded people, you know. So sometimes we our understanding of dharma is kind of disjointed and disconnected. And in part, I think because we don't live in an environment where we see all these high ideas, how it actually pervades, right? So on the one hand, there's what we just talked about. Like I agree with you. Like, you know, like, oh my God, it's impossible, right? At all times, right? It seems like you're creating negativity. But then there are also same time, you know, like something like this, you know. It says, just seeing this mantra, just touching this mantra, purify karma of negative karma of, like, you know, 50,000 lifetimes. Or, you know, seeing upon liberation upon seeing, this mantra you put above doors, just walking underneath it, you know, purifies blah, 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 right? Those teachings are also there. Yeah. And all of it, I think, to me, points to the dynamic nature. All of it points to, therefore, act skillfully. Therefore, act skillfully at all times, you know, given the chance, you know, and also knowing, because of the power of habit, we're not always going to choose, but then in the next moment, you can again choose. Also say, you know, one Om Mani Padme Hum said can purify so much negative karma. Taking one breath can generate so much negative karma as well. So don't forget the other side. Exactly. Don't forget the other side. Purifying the negative karma from our mind stream, from our minds, polishing negative karma away, accumulating merit. Merit can be easily destroyed. Merit can also be easily be created. When we see someone creating virtue, it's said that just to recognize that and even smile, you have gained the same merit, it says, as the merit that that person created. Conversely, when you see something good happening and you judge, that person is not sincere, then it says, whereas that person has accumulated merit, you have just accumulated negative karma. Or the young monk, saying to the teacher, you sound like a dog barking. Seems innocent enough, but it says 500 lifetimes. He was born as a dog. This 500 lifetimes is a common, somehow 500. Oh, 500 lifetimes. Oh, 500 lifetimes. Many of the texts here, 500 lifetimes.
Dr. Lai, in that story, it seems like there is also the element that he is not recollecting the principle of the guru. And
Yeah,
that
of
has,
course. Yes.
So
So the karmic effect of our actions become more consequential depending on who we are creating the karma in relation to. If you say to a dog, you're barking like a dog, it's not negative karma. Or very little negative karma. But if you say to your teacher, you sound like a dog barking, much more consequential. If you say to your parents hurtful things, much more consequential. So those who have been kind to us, if we return with unkindness, then the karma is heavier.
Okay.
Then for teachers, if you cause students to lose faith in Dharma, very serious. There's a story in the Zen tradition, that Dogen tells. This is about a monk, a teacher, in answering a question. Students ask him, when someone is awake and enlightened, does karma apply or not? And he said, no, it doesn't apply. And it said that as a result of that, he was reborn for the next 500 lifetimes as a fox. Why a fox? Because in East Asia, foxes are seen as trickster figures, that there's a fox spirits, and that they shift shape, they change. So in this case, this teacher was reborn 500 lifetimes as a fox until his final lifetime as a fox. It was not a fox as we know, but a fox spirit. And so he had the power to change himself into the form of a human being. Then he went to listen to this Buddhist teacher teach about cause and effect. And then he purified that misspeaking, that point. And then finally he was freed of the karma. So continuing the two examples, when Shariputra taught the lady until after sundown, since their minds were free from afflictions and endowed with the Dharma, there was no transgression. The activity, teaching the Dharma, was also faultless. And the result, the outcome, the lady's perception of the truth, that was also virtuous. Such activity is never prohibited. Therefore, this case is not an exception to the rule. The Buddha did not permit an afflicted meeting of a monk and a woman in private. Such a thing is prohibited at all times. The second example is interesting because the notion of an object plays a role. Vajra statement 3.6, the Tibetan term dushe, samnya, usually understood to mean a perception, which is recognition. In the sense of the apprehension of of the object characteristic is explicitly not understood in that way. That is, a false recognition of the object's characteristics was not the key point. Instead, the intention associated with the object was the principal point. So here, okay, translation. Here, Jigden Sumgun is emphasizing, it's not so important that you correctly perceive, right? If that is a stone or that is a turtle, for example. But your motivation. So if you threw a spear at a stone, thinking that it is a turtle or a dog, then it's negative karma. Whether it's actually a stone or a dog or a turtle is secondary. Your intention determines the quality of your action. So if you kick a stone thinking that it's a dog, then it's the karma of kicking a dog. But in the present virtue statement, it is clearly the notion of a woman that is to be willfully superimposed by the notion of a lump of earth or clay in order to permit a monk to touch a drowning woman when pulling her out of the water. Although the manipulation of the notion of the object is clearly a key point in this case, Chokyi Drakpa explicitly states that one who couples this skillful means of manipulation with the special Mahayana intention of benefiting another being, that one also couples. So it seems that here Chokyi Drakpa is presenting Mahayana intention as the principal point, and the notion of the object as but a secondary matter, namely a skillful means. The twist, however, is probably a later development, since Dorje Sherab and Rinchen Chanchup do not mention such an explicit Mahayana motivation. However that may be, the skillful means employed in the example does not provide an exception to the rule, but rather constitute an entirely different case. To touch a woman out of desire is prohibited in all respects, whereas to touch a clod of earth is not prohibited in any respect. Similarly, it is not prohibited for a sick monk to eat after noon if he cultivates the notion that he's taking medicine to benefit others. But instead, if the monk, know these rules, right? And then he gets sick, he's like, yay, I get to eat now. more meals than usual, then it's negative. The third and the fourth illustrations are connected with the rule prohibiting alcohol, which is related to an incident involving Arya Swagata, and the rule prohibiting lying with women at a single place, which the Buddha issued in the context of incidents involving Moggayayana, Aniruddha, and others. Why these points are mentioned here is not entirely clear. Immediately after providing the examples, the light of the sun states, Nimanangwa, which is our present commentary. The former actions free from desire exist even in the mental continuum of an animal and are permitted. The Dorshema continues by relating the story of the four wise beings of the Kashi forest, that is, the bird, the monkey, the rabbit, and the elephant, who respected each other, practiced the 5 basic rules, including the avoidance of intoxicants and acts of sexual desire, and thereby experience immeasurable benefit. Thus, it seems that these examples are mentioned here to show that both abstinence from alcohol and celibacy are natural virtues that even animals may possess, and that therefore intoxication and acts involving sexual desire are non-virtuous, not only for some people and not only at certain times. But this statement, provoked a response from Sakya Pandita, and then a reply later from Chokidrakpa. So here is when Sobish will take us to those debates between Sakya Pandita and so between these two sides. That I'm not sure if we need to get into too much details. It might get you even more confused. Any questions, comments? Certainly, if you want to read further, it's actually very good. It shows you, more precisely. But always try to remember, like in the end, we're not finding fault with Sakya Pandita. We're not, that will be an unskillful use of this kind of study. Here, we want to see Jigten Sumgun and the Dragong position and what that, highlights, what that brings into focus. Then if you're attending a class, on the clear differentiation of the 3 vows, which is the central text of Sakya Pandita that, responds to some of the Gongchik statements, not just Gongchik, but Kadampa, Nyingma, Sakya Pandita responds to a whole bunch of what he considered inconsistent views. So if you're studying the clear differentiation, then there you have to adopt and appreciate what Sakya Pandita is pointing out. So this should not devolve into sectarian partisan. My lineage is right, your lineage is wrong, my guru is right, your guru is wrong. This is to, to kind of see clearly, what is being pointed out there. And do I have that fault? And if I have that fault, then need to purify that fault, take that fault away. Otherwise, it easily becomes a sectarian argument. Then in the end, what is the problem with sectarian argument? It magnifies the ego. I'm right. Now, instead of my political position is right, my dharma position is right. But the effect is the same, you magnify the ego. Questions, comments? So 14 and 15 will continue mostly in this direction. And you might see this and say, you know, oh, it keeps repeating the same point. And I think it's because Kyoba Rinpoche really emphasizes the importance of seeing clearly this issue of karma vipaka, of cause and effect. And the issue of, you know, what are all these training vows for? What are all these precepts for? So this is the basis for even understanding the next two sets of vows, the Bodhisattva and the Vidyadhara Vajrayana Samayas. So we have to understand the basic points made here very clearly. So the 14 and 15 is in the same direction. 16 moves in a slightly different direction, but of course is connected. 16 actually says along the lines of like, don't underestimate the power of the ceremony of taking the vows. The power of the ceremony of the ritual of taking the vows. So there, Jigten Singha makes some, you know, very important points. 17, I think, gets at the root of, I would say, this karmic principle and how it relates to us choosing to act in certain ways and choosing not to act in certain other ways, which here he says, you know, the most dangerous, the most problematic of the three poisons is delusion, not anger and attachment. Yeah, so the next few statements are like this. So y'all have a good Friday and a good weekend. We have a Sang program tomorrow from 10 to 3 ish. We will try to do live stream on Facebook, but we'll have to see, you know, what the conditions are. We're outside, and so, but I'll try to bring my better microphone, external microphone, and see if it'll work better. But in any case, you all be good and be well. So now, dedication. Chanchu Semchu Rinpoche Magye Banam Ge Gyurche Ge Ba Nyam Ba Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Be War Shou. Want to remind everyone that the Medicine Buddha retreat on the weekend of the 6th, 7th, and 8th, evening of the 6th we start, all day 7, and we end on the morning of the 8th. Please do register with the respective centers that you're connected to. If your primary connection is Urban Dharma, we have a registration page through our website. If your primary connection is with other centers, they also have their registration. Please go ahead and do that. Now we have less of a pressure of, like too many people wanting to register, because we have a membership of 500 people for Zoom. And so even though we say, only register if you can participate 80%, even if you think, oh, only 70%, it's okay, go ahead and register. Oh, only 65%, go ahead and register. Participating on Zoom, I think the energy is a little different from just dropping in on Facebook in and out, so it's like Gilbert Rinpoche is saying, making a vow. Actually, this is a statement, a later statement. It says, it is taught that the fault of not obtaining the vow is greater than the fault of an impaired vow. Very interesting. The fault of not taking a vow is greater than the fault of damaging a vow. Very different, for example, from, we say, if you apply, like, for example, it sounds like it's saying, right? The fault of not marrying is greater than marrying and then, not being faithful. It sounds like that, But of course, here we're not talking about marriage. Yeah. Here we're talking about, taking those vows that the Buddha prescribed for us, not taking it completely is a greater fault than taking it and not being able to keep it. Yeah. Because why? Because whether you take or you don't take, unskillful, it is unskillful. Skillful, it is skillful. It doesn't matter. Then what is the purpose of taking? Taking becomes an added layer of protection. So that even when we break, and especially when we break, we have a reminder. Hey, that is not skillful. If you don't take at all, no reminders. So to take the vows is to drive with good brakes installed in your car. To not take the vows is like saying, going to the mechanic and say, can you remove the brake pads? You can still drive, but very dangerous. So a fault in that sense, very dangerous. Now you're driving recklessly. Okay, tata.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Gracias.